Hi everyone. We are going to make bread together today. Or at least you're going to learn how to make bread, and you can do it at another time if you want to. I used to work for a company several years ago, and my job was traveling around to elementary and middle schools all up and down the East Coast, teaching students in grades 4, sometimes 3, all the way up through 7th or 8th grade how to make bread. So I would, can you hear the horns? So I would go in and I would do a big assembly style presentation, and we would make bread right there in front of everyone. So that's what I'm going to do for you. And the wonderful thing about this is I can actually show you what the bread looks like when it's baked. Because when I did it in schools, I didn't have the opportunity to use their ovens, so I would have to bring bread in that I had already baked ahead of time. So this time you're going to get to see the whole process. So in the beginning, I'm going, oh, can you hear the rooster across the street? I don't know if you can. He's a pretty active little guy. Anyway, we are going to show you the whole process. So before you do any cooking or baking, there's several things that you need to take care of before you actually start mixing ingredients and putting things together. You need to read through your recipe a couple times if you need to, just to make sure that you know what you're going to be doing. Now, obviously, I don't have a print recipe. I might be able to type it up and put it on a link or something. Sorry, the rooster makes me laugh. But you're definitely going to want to look through. If you need to, watch the video 1 or 2 times so that you know what you're going to be doing. The next thing that you want to make sure that you have is all the things that you're going to need, all the equipment that you're going to need. So you'll see that I show you every piece of equipment that you're going to need, like bowls and spoons and measuring cups, things like that. Then you want to make sure that you have all the ingredients that you're going to need. So I'll show you all of the ingredients that this recipe calls for. Just before you get ready to start making your bread, there's 2 things that I really, really want you to make sure that you do. If you have long hair like mine, or even if it's not that long, if it's long enough to pull back in a ponytail, I want you to pull your hair back, because when you're cooking or baking, you don't want your hair falling into the food. It's really important. You can even wear a hat if you want to. So make sure you pull your hair back, and then just before you start, I want you to wash your hands really, really well, just like you would any other time. Sing the ABC song, sing Happy Birthday twice, make sure you get your hands nice and clean. Then you can jump into the recipe. The cool thing about this recipe is it makes it, at the end of it, you'll have several things that you can enjoy. When I went to schools, we had a really neat setup. Before I would even go to the school, they would have to tell me where they would be donating half of the loaves of bread. I know it's tough because we're not visiting a lot of people right now, but if there's someone you can give it to, take one of the things that you make and give it to them, because it's going to make them feel really good that you thought of them and you made them something really special with your own 2 hands, and it's going to make you feel proud too, because it's possibly a new skill for you that you've learned, and you're sharing that with someone, which is really, really nice, and it's always a good feeling to give back to someone else. And if you do this recipe, you try this recipe, I would love to see pictures of what you make. So if you're willing, you can put them up on Facebook in the comments, or you can email them to me. And at the end of this video, my email will be up so you can see that. All right, hopefully you enjoy this. Hopefully you have fun and you learn something. You can also ask any questions that you like in the comments or via email too. All right, everybody, enjoy making bread. So the first thing I want to show you is the equipment that you're going to need. You don't need one of these. I could easily just be using my kitchen counter. But I put this down just so that I had a frame of reference for my video. You will need a mixing bowl, a pretty large mixing bowl. Plastic or glass, does not matter. You'll need a liquid measuring cup. This happens to be, I don't know if you can see that, a 2-cup measuring cup. You could also have a 1-cup measuring cup, but I just picked this one. So you'll need a liquid measuring cup because it is different from your dry measuring cups. So this is what your dry measuring cups look like. You can tell it's for liquids because it has a spout and a handle so that you can pour the liquids right out. These are dry, no spout. You will need a 1 cup, and usually they're written right on the handle somewhere. So this is a 1 cup dry measuring cup, and this is a 1/4 of a cup, or a 1/4 cup dry measuring cup. So you'll need those two. We'll just kind of keep things here. You will need a set of measuring spoons. And again, these come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes, but you'll be able to tell by the handles what the measurements are. So 1 tablespoon, 1 teaspoon, 1/2 teaspoon, 1/4 teaspoon. So you need your measuring spoons. You'll need a mixing spoon. It can be plastic or wooden, doesn't matter. I just happened to pick a wooden one this time. It's always a good idea to have a couple of paper towels or a dish towel, like this, available. We will need some plastic wrap and 2 different kinds of baking pans, depending on what you're going to make. I'm going to show you how to make a couple of things. I'm probably going to use my cake pan. If you don't have something like that, you can use a tin foil pan like this. But you'll need a round one, and you'll need one to put the loaf of bread on. So this is just a regular cookie sheet, just like this. And I happen to cover mine with some parchment paper. If you don't have parchment paper, that's okay. You can just spray it with a little bit of cooking spray, or you can lightly rub a little bit of oil on it before we put the dough on, but that's later. So this is your baking sheet. And then some sort of a spatula. I have this nifty little tool that you can use for making bread. It's called a dough scraper. I have this, but you could also just use a regular old spatula, rubber scraper like this. All right, so those are your supplies. Oh, and if you want to make something that we're going to make in the end, I have a fun trick with dental floss. So if you have dental floss, you can grab a piece of dental floss. So those are our supplies. The next thing we'll need to gather are our ingredients. So I'm going to scooch some of this out of the way so that I can show you what the ingredients that we'll be using consist of. We'll need water, but I'm going to get that when we're ready because we want the water to be warm. So we will be using regular all-purpose flour, white whole wheat flour, yeast, and I happen to have a big pack of yeast, but the recipe actually calls for the little packets of yeast. So if you happen to have those lying around, those are what's going to work. But we have yeast. We have salt. That's where my salt lives. So we have salt. We have vegetable oil. Just regular old vegetable oil. We have sugar, which is in my little Tupperware container. And like I said, we're going to use water. So to start, we need to get 2 cups of lukewarm water. And the reason I say that you want your water to be lukewarm is because when we use our yeast, Yeast is a living thing. I don't know if you all knew that, but it is. It's an organism. And just like other living things, it needs food and it needs warmth in order to survive. So if yeast goes into water that's too cold, it's not going to be able to do what it needs to do. If yeast goes into water that's too hot, it will kill the yeast, and then obviously yeast that isn't alive isn't going to do what we want it to do either. And we'll talk about what we want it to do in a little while. But one of the easiest ways to test if your water is okay, and we have clean hands, so we can totally do this, is take your finger and just put it in the water. And if it feels like the temperature of the water that you would want to take a bath in, after you leave it there for maybe 5 or 10 seconds, then it's fine. It's a good temperature. If you put it in there and it feels cold, you probably need to get some warmer water. If you put it in and you just can't leave your finger in there, it's way too hot, then you need to let that water cool down. But we have 2 cups. So I looked on my measuring cup. I'm holding it at an angle, but when I hold it straight, it's at the 2-cup measure. So the 2 cups of water will go right into our bowl. Now, we want to add the yeast next. So if you have an actual packet of yeast, you'll just rip the yeast open, put it in the bowl, and stir it around till it's all mixed together. I do not have packets of yeast. I have loose yeast. So if you also have loose yeast, I'll show you the measurements that you need to add. You're going to take your teaspoon measure, and that says 1, you see it? 1 TSP, and that is the abbreviation for teaspoon. So you're going to take your teaspoon measure, you're going to dip it into your yeast, and this is what it looks like. Kind of like sand, sort of. And you're just going to sprinkle that on your water. Then you're going to do it again. So 2 1/4 teaspoons. So I'm going to look at my measuring spoon, and that is in fact 1/4 of a teaspoon. I'm going to put that in there too. And you may notice by now that because the water is the perfect temperature for the yeast, it's happy. So it's starting to kind of relax in the water and bloom. That's one way that we talk about yeast blooming. So you want to mix this around. And it's okay if there's lumps. You don't have to get all the lumps out. You just want to make sure it's dissolved a little bit. So we've provided the yeast with the warmth it likes. It also likes moisture. It likes to be wet. So obviously the water does that for us. So we have warm, wet yeast. But what we want the yeast to do is eat and burp. Because when yeast eats, it burps off CO2, and that's going to help us. CO2 is carbon dioxide. That's going to help us get our bread to rise. So what does yeast eat, you ask? Yeast eats sugar. So we're going to add some sugar to our recipe. So this is where we're going to take our dry measuring cup, our 1/4 cup measuring cup. We're going to take 1/4 of a cup of sugar. And another use for this handy dandy dough scrape is we don't want, it's hard for me to show you this, we don't want the sugar heaped up. We want it nice and level with the sides of this. So I can take the flat edge of this and just scrape it right off, and then I have exactly the amount of sugar that I need. So I'm going to sprinkle that in, and then we're going to mix it up. Now I promise you the yeast is eating, and if we let it sit there a while, it will continue to eat. Excuse me. And then it would start to give off CO2 or carbon dioxide. and we would see little bubbles. To show you this even more readily, for lack of a better word, I'm going to add a cup of our flour, because you'll be able to see the yeast doing what it needs to do. Now, one thing about measuring flour, you'll notice that I have my bags of flour here, but I also have this container full of flour with a little scooper in it. When you're measuring flour, if I were to dip my container, I'm going to use the smaller one so you can see what I mean. If I were to dip my dry measuring cup into my bag of flour, some of the flour may get packed into the bottom of the measuring cup. And I'm going to see if I can show you this. So even if I scrape it off, if I dump this out, you can kind of, it's hard to see, but you can see the shape of, especially right here, the shape of the measuring cup. We don't want the flour to be packed down. We want the flour to be nice and loose and fluffy. So it's always a good idea to take your flour out of the container that you buy it in, pour it in to a container with a nice wide opening, like this. And then you can scoop your flour, scoop and sprinkle your flour. So right now I'm just going to do 1 cup. So this is my 1 cup measure, dry measure, no spout. And I'm going to take my scoop and I'm just going to sprinkle the flour into the cup so it doesn't get packed down. And really, this is the way you should measure out flour for all your recipes, because unless you're weighing it on a scale, that's how the recipes are written, for nice, light, fluffy flour. Then we're going to put that right in there. Okay. We're going to mix this up. And then I'm going to let it sit for a minute. And if all goes well, we'll start to see some bubbles. And the bubbles are the yeast's carbon dioxide burps. You may know, if you've seen adults make bread, or if you're a seasoned bread maker yourself, you may know that some bread recipes don't call for sugar at all. These recipes work, obviously, because you probably get delicious breads out of them, but you may think, well, Nurse Gina said that yeast eats sugar, so if there's no sugar in the bread, how is it that the yeast is having enough to eat? Well, as we know, flour is a carbohydrate. That's one of the essential nutrients, a carbohydrate. So there is sugar in carbohydrates. When things like flours, or, well, I say flours like flour, but there are various types of flours. Potatoes, things like that, when they're digested, they form sugars. So if you're making a bread recipe that doesn't call for white sugar or brown sugar or honey or molasses or anything like that, the yeast will eat the carbohydrates in the flour. All right, so we're going to leave this here for just a second. You can already, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, tricky to show you this. Let's see if I hold it up. There are tiny little bubbles. I don't know if you can see them, but they're coming. You can see some down near the bottom there. Some of those are from stirring, but then there's tinier ones in the middle. Those in the middle are the yeast. So little tiny bubbles, and the longer we let that sit there, the more and more bubbles we would see, which is exactly what we want. So if you mix this up and you're not seeing any bubbles, but you were pretty sure your water was a good temperature, just let it sit a little bit longer. Give it maybe 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes. Come back, look at it, check for bubbles. I can totally see that there's more and more bubbles forming, so that's amazing. Check for some bubbles. If after 10 minutes you're not really seeing any bubbles, 10, 15, maybe give it another 5, check it again. If there's no bubbles at all, then either your water was too cold or too hot, or your yeast may be too old. So you may have to start again and try it over a couple times if it's not working. But I can tell that this is working really well. So we can move on to our next step, which is adding our salt and our oil. Now again, not all recipes have oil in them. The reason we put oil in this recipe is it makes the dough a little bit softer and a little bit easier to work with, and it adds a little bit of flavor. So I'm going to scooch this aside so as not to confuse things. And we are going to add our oil. So we want 1/4 cup of oil. So you might think you can reach back for this cup, but you're not going to use that one because there's no spout. I mean, you can if that's all you have. It's not going to hurt the recipe. But ideally, you will use your liquid measuring cup. And if you look way down at the bottom, where is it here? I know it's there. There it is. 1/4 cup. Only that tiny little amount of oil. That's all that goes in this recipe. So I'm going to measure that out. You might see my head come into the frame because I got to get low. You may not though. I don't know. That's it. Just that tiny little bit of oil. So then we're going to put that in. And then we're going to add our salt. Now salt is in all bread recipes. Salt helps add a lot of flavor. And in this recipe, we add 1 tablespoon of salt. And tablespoon is TBLS. 1 tablespoon of salt. Salt also kind of keeps the yeast under control. It's kind of like you're grown up when you're sitting with a bag of chips and you're about to eat the whole thing. And they come over and say, hey, slow down. That's kind of what the salt does to the yeast. Just slows it down a little. It can still eat, and it will. It'll just take its time about it. Okay, now we only have one more thing to add to our mix to make dough, and that is more flour. So I will grab my all-purpose flour, and we are going to add 2 more cups of all-purpose flour, and then we'll add 3 cups of our white whole wheat flour. Now if you don't have white whole wheat flour, you can try using all-purpose flour, but you'll either need a little less liquid or a little more flour, because whole wheat flour is drier than white flour. So again, it's okay if there's lumps. You just kind of want to get it mixed in as best you can. And then, I have to get my other container. I forgot. One second. I'm going to grab this because I have to dump out my white whole wheat flour. So we're going to add 3 cups of this. And white whole wheat is just a different variety of whole wheat flour. And whole wheat flour is healthy for us. I mean, anything in moderation, if we don't overeat, anything is really okay. But this flour still has the bran. If you look up what a kernel of wheat looks like, you will see that there's the germ and the bran, and I'm spacing out, and I shouldn't be on the other part. But white flour does not have the germ or the bran. Okay, so that was 3. And now we're going to mix this up. And this is where you really need to use your muscles. And you don't want to go at it really quickly because you'll get flour all over the place, and that's a big old mess. So you just kind of gently mix this in, and we're getting it ready. We're getting it to a point where we can knead the dough. Not N-E-E-D, but K-N-E-A-D, which is a process that helps us trap the yeast's burps so that our bread rises. So flours have proteins or amino acids in them called gluten and gliadinin. So the gluten and the gliadinin, the more you mix dough, the stronger those bonds get, the stronger those amino acids get. They're almost like rubber bands. So if you think about a rubber band, it's really stretchy and really pliable. That's what we're doing to the dough. We're making all these tiny rubber bands all throughout the dough. I'm just going to take, here's a really good tip. If you have a bunch of sticky, messy dough on your hands or on the spoon, you can see it right here on the spoon. If you just take a little bit of flour, I'm going to use the all-purpose. Just take a little bit of flour and sprinkle that on there. And sprinkle that on there. It'll come right off. It's a baker's trick. When your hands are covered, just use a little bit of flour to get things off instead of running it underwater. There you go. Okay. Now, when it gets, I'm going to take my ring off because I don't want it full of flour. When it gets to this point where it's kind of shaggy, there's a little bit of flour left in the bottom that's not mixed in, it's okay to dump it out onto your counter. I'm going to take a little bit of flour and just dust my board because we don't want it to stick, and then dump out your dough. Save the bowl and maybe try to clean it out just a little bit with your hand because we're going to use that to rest our dough. So this is where we're ready to knead. Now kneading, like I said, is going to build up those amino acids. It's going to build up that gluten and all those rubber bands that are going to form kind of a, it's going to help us form our dough into a dome, ball-like shape. As the yeast eats and burps, those rubber bands are going to catch the burps and the dough is going to expand and rise. So when you're kneading dough, this is one way, you pick up the dough and you fold it in half, like that. And then you take the heel of one hand, this part of your hand, and you gently push it forward. Then you spin, fold it in half, push, spin, and if you feel wet spots, give it a second because it might pick up a little flour. But if it keeps feeling wet, you might need to add a little sprinkle. So again, fold it in half, and you can use two hands. This is a firm but gentle motion. Take the heels, push it forward, spin, fold, 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 push it forward, and then the sponge a little sticky, just a little bit of flour. Then you'll notice there's all these scraggly bits. Once you kind of have it like a ball you can pick up, don't put those scraggly bits in anymore. Keep those off to the side. They can, because they've been sort of separated, they can end up like you can have all these crispy little bits in your dough. So just kind of let them fall to the side once you get it to a place that's similar to this. And then the more you practice, the faster you can go. So I'm just going to go for it, so you're not standing here watching me knead dough all day. But the goal is to get it to a place, and I can feel it as I'm kneading. I can feel the wetness coming out. So I'm going to put a little bit more flour down, just a little bit. You don't want to add too much because you can't take it out. You can always add more, but once in there, you can't get it back. So just keep kneading, and I'll show you what we're looking for. It's probably about 30 kneads or maybe a couple minutes, like if you wanted to count. I go by feel, but that's hard to teach in one video, so you'll see what this looks like when I'm done with it. Getting there, almost there. When your dough is kneaded well enough, it should be smooth, pretty smooth, and elasticy. Is that a word? Elastic-like? And I'll show you how we test that, and hopefully it shows up on the video. So let's test. So then when you're done, just kind of gather it all up into a nice little ball. Take one or two fingers, push down, and if it pops back out, could you see that? You push down and then the indentation comes back out. Push down, indentation comes back out. See how it springs back? That means that we've got our gluten to a point, our rubber bands to an elastic enough point where they're going to allow this to grow. So let's see. This dough ball on my circle is about 6 inches around. So when we let this rest, and the yeast does what it needs to do, and the gluten does what it needs to do, and everything does its job, we should have a ball of dough that's bigger than 6 inches around. So remember, I said keep your bowl. We're going to let it rest in this bowl. So when you let your dough rest, you want to do it in a fairly warm place, not hot, because again, you don't want the yeast to get hot. You just want it to be comfortable. So you'll put a little bit, clean your bowl out as best you can. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to put a little drip of oil in the bottom. And then you can take a paper towel or your hand, it doesn't matter, and just rub. I'm going to use my hand because a paper towel absorbs too much. Just rub the oil around in the bowl. Just has to be lightly coated. That is so the yeast or the dough doesn't stick to the sides of the bowl. Put it right in there. Then we want to cover it with some plastic wrap. If you leave the dough out uncovered, it starts to dry out. And if you remember, yeast likes to be wet and warm, so we want to keep it moist and warm. We don't want it to get cold. Okay, so then this will just sit until this ball doubles in size. About an hour, maybe an hour and a half. All right, so this is a good time to go outside and play, to do some reading, to have a Google Meet, whatever it is you need to do. This is just gonna sit. So I'm gonna come back after this is risen and show you what we do with it. Welcome back. It's been, for me, it's been about 90 minutes or an hour and a half. And if you remember, our dough filled up this 6-inch circle. So let's see what it looks like now. Way bigger. So we're going to take off the saran wrap. Now, I don't know if you can see that. There's some air bubbles in here. So our gluten worked and our yeast did its job and it ate. And if I push my finger into this, do we think it's going to sink in or is it going to rise up? Let's see. It's going to stay right in there. That's exactly what we want. So we kneaded our dough and we got our rubber bands nice and tight so it could hold in and stretch. Now the rubber bands are stretched because it caught all that carbon dioxide that the yeast gave out. So we're going to take our dough out of the bowl. Let's see how big it got. 8 inches. So it grew by 2 inches in circumference. All right. I washed my hands, my hair is up. Now what we want to do, since we're going to make 2 things, not 4, 2 things, we are going to take our, I don't know what to do with it. Oh, it's right here, it's under my paper towel. We're going to take our dough scraper. Actually, you know, not everybody has one of these, so let me just show you what you can use. You can just use a butter knife or a knife with a serrated edge. If you're using a knife with a serrated edge, follow the rules of your house. If you're not allowed to use knives, make sure you get a grown-up to help you do this. But you're going to cut, it doesn't have to be perfect, you can just eyeball it. You're going to cut the dough down the middle. Okay. And if it doesn't go all the way, just help it along. But you want to make sure to cut, not tear. So there's one, and here's the other. So I'm just going to set this one aside for now. We'll use that in a little bit. If your dough is especially sticky, mine is really, really nice. It's not sticking to my hands. It's not sticking to the mat. I'm not going to put down any flour. If it's sticking, feel free to sprinkle a little bit of flour. I just like to try, because we're going to make a braided loaf of bread now. And as you'll see, there'll be a little bit more waiting. So this is a project that you have to plan for. This isn't one you can just start, because as you saw, we mixed, we rested for about an hour and a half. Now we're going to shape, then we're going to rest again, so that the yeast can have another meal. So it's almost like we're giving yeast a breakfast and then a lunch. So we got to make sure we give it time to do that. So once you have a rough looking rectangle, we're gonna eyeball this and we're gonna cut it into 3 pieces, because for a braid you need 3 pieces. There are a lot of other ways to do braids. There's fancy 5-strand braids, there's fancy 6-strand braids, there's all kinds of different braids. But for now I'm gonna try to keep it pretty simple for you. And if you feel like one's a little bit bigger than the other one, you can just lop some off and put it on the other one. Now, so we have our 3 pieces of dough. We're going to take these 3 pieces and we're going to start to roll them out into ropes. Now I'm not slamming my hand down. I'm not jamming it into the dough. I'm just rolling it firmly but gently, just like we did when we shaped it. And as I roll, I stretch. And that's what we're going to do with all 3 of these pieces of dough. So the way I do it, I start in the middle and I start to roll, and as I'm rolling, I'm ever so slightly pulling. Again, roll. roll it out from the middle, and you go to the ends. And then if the middle is thinner, just scooch it over and do the same thing on the ends. Because you want it all pretty much the same width all the way across. It's okay if it's a little different, but you want it generally the same width. So that looks good. So you've got 3 pieces. Then you want to take the 3 pieces and put them lengthwise and pinch the top together so that they stick together. And then we're going to braid. So if you know how to braid, you can just go for it. If you've never braided before, you're going to take the outside piece. In my case, it's the left piece. So left over middle. And then this becomes the middle. Right over middle. Left over middle. Right over middle. Left over middle. Right over middle. Left over middle, right over middle, left over middle, right over middle, left, right, and you just go all the way down. You notice I'm just sort of scrunching the bread together as I go. It just keeps it a little more uniform. And then when you get to the end, you just pinch those together too. Scrunch your bread up, kind of straighten it out, and then you've got a really cool braided loaf of bread. So now this is where you'll want to put your loaf of bread on whatever pan you're going to bake it on. So the pan that I showed you in the beginning, you remember that one? That's the pan I'm going to bake it on. So I want to rest it on that pan as well. So I'll just get it situated how I want it, because that's pretty much how it's going to stay while it bakes. And then I want to cover that up with some plastic wrap. Because again, we don't want it to get crusty and hard. So at this point, because we worked with the dough some more, we strengthened those rubber bands again. So when the yeast has its second meal, it will give off those burps, the rubber bands will catch the bubbles, and this will grow a little bit bigger too. So we're just going to put that off to the side, again, till it gets double the size. Now, for this one, let's see, I want to make sure I show you how to make the roll-ups. So I think I'm going to cut this in half and show you 2 different things. Alright, so we have this. Normally I would use the entire second half of the dough for this, but I want to make sure that you see both things. So if you have a rolling pin, you're going to want that now. If you don't, sometimes you can use, if you have water bottles, I don't have one right near me, but if you have like a glass water bottle, you can use that as well. But you're going to roll this out. And you can pick it up and flip it. You can help it, stretch it out a little bit. Stretch it out. Give this one more roll and call it done, and then I'll show you how to fill it. Now, I say roll-ups because I'm going to use cinnamon and sugar, so they'll be like little cinnamon rolls, but you really could use whatever you want. You could put peanut butter in here, you could put nuts and raisins, you could put chocolate chips, whatever you like. This is just a mixture of some regular sugar, some brown sugar, and cinnamon. So you want to make sure that you leave some on the edge, plain, without any sprinklings of sugar on there. But you give it a fairly good coat of sugar, and you can use your hand to spread that out. Go a little more. I really like cinnamon sugar, so I put quite a bit. Then you're going to take this and you're going to roll it up. So you start at the end that's farthest away from you, and you just start to roll. And I like to try to make it as tight a roll as I can, so you'll see I kind of pull it tightly and then roll, pull it tightly and then roll, pull and roll, pull and roll. That's how I like to do it. You go all the way till you get to the end, and then you'll see that we have this seam here. So all you need to do with the seam is take your fingers and kind of pinch it shut. That will keep it from opening up. And then you can roll it a little bit more to seal it even more. Alright, now you might have been wondering why I have the dental floss out. I'm going to show you right now. And this is where I'm going to need my round pan. So give me, again, a round pan like this, or it can be the tinfoil pan like I showed you before. I'm just going to spray a little bit of cooking spray in there. If you don't have that, you can use the oil. Then, oh, before I do that, I want to mark it. So we're going to eyeball this again, totally eyeball it. We're going to go about the middle, just make a little mark. And we're going to take this, we have our two halves, we're going to cut our two halves into halves. So then we should have, how many pieces? 4 pieces. So if we cut a half in half, and we cut a half in half, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 quarters. We're going to do that one more time. So we're going to cut our quarters. We're going to double our quarters. So we have 1 quarter, 2 quarter, 3 quarter, 4 quarter. And now I'm going to cut each one in half. And we should end up with eighths. And let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces. Now, you could just cut these with your knife. Here, let me start back here. Just gentle sawing. And this is what they look like. And then you want to put the roll side up in your pan. Give it a little squish. Or you could take your dental floss, which I have here, and slide it underneath, line it up with your line. Now, like you're going to tie your shoe, you take and you cross it over, go like you're going to make a knot, make the knot, and that works just as well. So whichever way, I'll do the dental floss one more time, whichever way you find more exciting, you can do it that way. You're going to make it like you're going to make a knot, and then you're just going to pull it straight through. And there you go. So if you use a quarter of the batch of the dough, which we are, because remember an entire half of the batch was used for the braided loaf, and then we cut our second half in half. So a quarter is these cinnamon rolls, and a quarter is still left. And I'm going to show you how that works, or what we can do with that. Now, it doesn't really matter if the dental floss is flavored or not. I just realized I'm using mint because I started smelling mint. It won't hurt anything. So here's your cinnamon rolls. And you want these to rest as well, to give the yeast time to eat its second meal, burp, and give off those gases. And then the third thing, there's all kinds of things we can make. I don't know, when the video went out, I don't think I got to talk about making sure you know what you want to make when you are starting to shape your dough. That's what this is called. So we mixed it, that's when we mixed all our ingredients together, and we kneaded it, and now and we let it rest, and now we're shaping it. So if I were to ball this up and roll it around, those rubber bands are going to get really, really, really tight again, and it's not going to be as stretchy for me to work with. So you want to know what you're making. So before you even make your dough, decide, I think I'll do all cinnamon rolls, or I think I'll do a braided loaf and I'll use the other half completely for cinnamon rolls, or I think I'll do pretzels. I can show you how pretzels work. So when you have your dough, we have a quarter left. I'm just going to cut strips and show you how the pretzels work. You can make them as big or small as you'd like. I'm just going to make 4 just to show you. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to make a rope. Let's see if I can remember how to do this. I haven't done a pretzel in a long time. Then you make a U. Well, it's like an upside down U. And then you cross one side over the other side, cross them again, and then you take the bunny ears and you put them on either side of the top of your U. Push down, spread out, pretzel. So, if you are making a braided loaf, there is a little bit of room on here. You can probably put a pretzel on each end. So I'll show you that again. I'm going to roll it out. I'll see if I can do it upside down. Make a U. Cross one end over the other. Cross one end over the other. Take your bunny ears, fold them over onto the end there, and spread out the top of your U. And you got a pretzel. So all of these things are going to sit and rest for probably another hour. For me, I'm going to check them in an hour and see where we're at. And there's tons of sites online that you can look up to see how to shape even different things, like maybe rolls. You can make a pizza. If you took it and you rolled it out in a round shape. You can make little swirls. That's what I'll do with this one. I won't do another pretzel. But you just take the end and you just twist it up on itself. Over and 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 over. And it makes a little, hold on, there. We'll see what this looks like when it comes out of the oven. If I cut that in half, I could have cute little rolls. But there you go. So there's lots of different things you can do. I want to make sure that I cover these up as well. So I may just put a piece of saran wrap over the whole tray. Like this. And the last thing we need to do after we rest this is bake it. So when we get to that point, I will talk to you about what we need to put on top of this and what we can put on top of these if we want to, and what temperatures and times and things like that, but these are going to sit and rest for an hour. All right, we're back. It's been a little over an hour for me, And as you can see, everything has gotten bigger. Even our cinnamon rolls. They're all nice and goopy too. Those are gonna be good. So I have preheated my oven to 400 degrees. And now we have some options. For the loaf of bread, to make it nice and shiny and golden, I have a little bit of water in the bowl already, just a couple tablespoons. I'm going to crack an egg. And we're going to mix that up. This is called an egg wash. It helps make things nice and golden and shiny. And I just have a little kitchen brush. I'm just going to brush the egg wash over the top of your loaf of bread. Now for the pretzels and the little roll, you can do this as well, and I'm choosing to do this as well, and I'm going to show you what else I'm going to do, especially to the pretzels. Alright, so we have that all nice and coated with our egg wash. Now for the pretzels, I like a nice salty pretzel. So I have my salt. I'm going to brush a little bit of the egg wash on, and then I'm going to put a fair sprinkling of salt, and the egg wash will help the salt stick. I'm going to do that to 2 of the pretzels, and the other pretzel, I'm going to do a little egg wash, and a little cinnamon sugar on this one. You could also do some grating cheese. That would be good. So I'm just going to coat this one. And then for the roll, I might just show you what things look like when you don't egg wash them. So I'm going to leave this guy plain. Alright, and then these are going to go into the oven. I hesitate to give you a time. Check them after 15 minutes. So I'm going to put these in. This in as well. So what I'm going to do is, I have to put it on the bottom rack of my oven, and I don't want the bottoms of these to burn. So I'm going to put another sheet tray on there just to spare it. I'm going to set my timer for 15 minutes. And I'll be back. We'll see what they do. So I baked mine for about 25 minutes. So I would say 20-25 minutes at a 400 degree oven will get you what we're looking for, which is this. Move my glass of water. Nice golden brown breads and pretzels. I gotta get another pot holder for my cinnamon rolls. And I will show you those. Let me back this up so you can see the cinnamon rolls look really yummy. So maybe what I will show you in a separate video that's super hot is a glaze that you can put over your cinnamon rolls. It's really simple to make. So you can kind of see that this has a little bit of a sheen to it, a little bit of a shine, and this one does not. This is a roll that had nothing on it, but that's what that would look like. I'm just setting them on a cooling rack. These are pretzels with salt, and they are hot. So again, knives and ovens, follow the rules of your house. Make sure you have a grown-up helping you. This This is the pretzel with the cinnamon sugar on it. Looks really yummy. And then I'm just going to try my best, without burning my hands, to get the bread. I have to wait really hot, so definitely have a grown-up. I wanted to try to show you how you can tell it's done. One, you can tell it's golden brown, nice and golden brown. 25, 30 minutes you'll have this. You can also kind of tap the bottom of it. And if it sounds hollow like that, you can pretty much be sure that it's done. You can also, I'm multitasking and sauteing garlic and onions for my tacos. You can also use a thermometer if you happen to have one. This is a kitchen thermometer. And you would just put your thermometer in so that it's kind of in the middle of the bread. And if it's 190 or above, you're good to go. 190 will deactivate the yeast, and you'll be golden. All right, so this is what we get. And hopefully you'll be able to make these at home. Now, if this were me, I would probably, well, I don't know what I would do. I would probably keep these and probably give away, well, I would keep a couple of the cinnamon rolls, but then I would gift my loaf of bread and I would gift some of the cinnamon rolls to family or neighbors. So again, let me know if you have questions. And let me see photos if you make any of it. And if you don't want to put them up on Facebook, you can email me. So it's G as in Gina, CIANCIA@acsdvt.org. I'd love to see your stuff. Thanks everybody. Bye. Just one more thing I want to show you. I flipped my cinnamon rolls out because the brown sugar comes off the bottom and it makes like a little syrup on the bottom of the pan. So if you don't flip them out, they'll end up sticking. But that's going to be delicious. Delicious. Okay, I think I am going to make that glaze. So I will attach that to the end of this video so that you can all see how that works. Here we are, we have our cinnamon rolls. I separated them so that when I drizzle glaze over them, it falls over the sides and doesn't just stay on the top. And I have a tray underneath to catch the glaze. So I don't really measure when I make a glaze like this. This is just confectioner's sugar and milk. So I put a little bit in the bowl, and you're going to use a lot less milk than you think you're going to need. So I just kind of dribble a tiny bit in there. And I have this fun whisk that I use when I make this type of frosting or glaze. And if you don't have a rack like this with the holes in it, you can just dip these in the glaze. I'll show you that too. And I'm definitely going to need a little bit more milk. But again, kind of like the flour when you're making the bread, you can always add more. You can't take it out. But the nice thing about this kind of frosting too is if you put too much milk, like I just did, you can just add more confectioner's sugar. So it's not a big deal. And it depends on how thick or how runny you like your glaze or your frosting as well. If you like it really runny, then this one's good. If you like it a little bit thicker like I do, you want to add a little bit more till it gets to be the consistency that you like. It's still a little bit runny for me. I like it so that it's not going to run right off the cinnamon roll or cookie. There's cookies that I make that use this as well. So I just keep adding little by little until I get where I want it to be. That's better. I'd probably add a little bit more, but we're just going to go with it. If it was cookies, I would add a little bit more. So I'm just going to use my whisk And I'm going to sop up some frosting, and I'm just going to drizzle it on there. Just like that. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then it'll drip through. Oh, I told you I would show you how to dip one too. Okay. Now, a note to everyone. If you're a bread lover, and you're a lover of home-baked breads, or you're a lover of artisan breads, be forgiving with this recipe, because this recipe is intended to be foolproof for kids. So keep that in mind when you taste it. So you would just take and dip. And then you get a little bit more coverage. So you can do it either way. I'm just going to drizzle because it's more fun. So there you have it. I do find that kids enjoy this recipe, the taste of it. Admittedly, I'm a bit of a, I'll eat, Freihoffers and Wonder and all that jazz, but I'm a bit of a bread snob. So I really enjoy artisan breads, but kids will like the taste of this though. And what's even better, and probably why kids enjoy the taste so much, is because they make it all by themselves, which is a huge, huge, huge accomplishment. So be proud of yourself if you try this. And if it doesn't work, try it again. If it's really something that you want to try to learn how to do, keep trying. It takes a while to learn things like this, and this is tricky because there's a lot of pieces and parts to it. And my egg always wants to fall out of the bowl. Anyway, I won't ramble on. Enjoy. I hope you have fun making this. I hope you make it together. I hope it brings people together, and I hope you're able to share some of it with friends and family. Bye, everybody. How'd you do? Did you enjoy it? Did you learn? Did you have fun? Who did you do it with? Did you do it together? Did you try to do it all by yourself? Let me know. I'd love to hear. And don't forget, send pictures if you have them.